Okay, so I just started the live feed. We're a little bit late, 15 minutes late on that. My apologies to anybody who's watching online. We just spent a couple of minutes going over some of these Hebrew phrases just for fun, and we can do that again later, some other evenings. And I've just passed out now the review questions for tonight, so we want to take a look at those. I'll put them up here on the screen. So tonight, in tonight's lecture, we're going to start looking at specific places. Last week, we kind of took the big, broad, overall look at the geography of Israel, the height and the breadth of the land, so to speak. And in a way, we kind of looked at three dimensions. We looked at north to south and east to west, and when we were talking about these different eras, different time frames, we're actually kind of going up and down. If you dig down through a tell, for example, you go down through time. So it's almost like a three-dimensional view of the land and the geography and history. Tonight we're going to start going through the different locations in Israel and commenting here and there about their historical significance and their biblical significance. So question number one, we're going to be talking about indicate on a map the location of the following. And I've got one of these line maps, if anybody needs one. You might have one from last time. Does anybody need one? Yeah, I do. Okay. There. Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? I've got lots of them. Just to draw on. Okay. Get it on down. So I want you to be able to indicate on a map the following places. Jaffa. This is, okay, I'll say it both ways. Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea, but the proper pronunciation is Caesarea, with a hard K sound. Caesarea Maritima, the Sea of Galilee, and Capernaum. Okay, so we'll kind of focus on these four areas. We'll be talking about more than these four, but I want you to be able to locate these four places on a map. Talking about Jaffa, question number two, to which tribe was Jaffa allotted under Joshua? Okay, so we'll find the city of Jaffa, and we'll be wondering the question, when Joshua entered the promised land, divided the land among tribes, which tribe got Jaffa? Number three, who imported cedar trees to the harbor in Jaffa? Number four, who is associated with Jaffa in the New Testament? Fifth, now moving up to modern history, under the British Mandate, by whom was Jaffa inhabited primarily? Sixth, who was the builder of Caesarea Maritima? Number seven, in the New Testament, who was imprisoned for 2 years at Caesarea Maritima? Number eight, what is the elevation of the Sea of Galilee? And I've got a little video clip, well, about 20, 30-minute video on the Sea of Galilee we'll look at a little bit later on this evening. Really a good one. Number nine, according to the Nun Egeria, who coexisted in Capernaum as late as AD 400? Number 10, whose house has been excavated in Capernaum? 11, who built the first century synagogue in Capernaum? And number 12, after the first century synagogue was destroyed, when was the next synagogue built? Okay, so we're going to hope to cover all those in tonight's class. Turn the clock so I don't shout, right? Everybody warm enough in here? Unfortunately, it takes forever for that heater to shut off, but we'll get there. Okay. So if you have your booklets from last time, we will be kind of going through this material. And first of all, on page 5 of this booklet, you'll find a nice map, like the line drawing map that we have with some locations pointed out on it. So that's kind of what we're talking about, and you'll notice that on the west coast, you have Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is joined together with Jaffa. Tel Aviv and Jaffa are like right next door to each other. Jaffa just to the south. And that's sort of where we're going to start our journey tonight. So this is lecture number 2 on the history and geography of Israel. And as we're looking then at this map on page 5, notice these different locations. Number 1, Tel Aviv. Now, we are not going to start our tour in Tel Aviv, but years ago we used to, and that's why it's number 1. Okay, just because we used to start our tour here, and I haven't renumbered the map. We're actually going to start our tour down by the Sea of Galilee, but we will land in Israel near Tel Aviv. The main international airport is just outside of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is about halfway down the west coast of Israel, and it is a very modern city. Just to the south of Tel Aviv, as I said, is the city of Jaffa. Moving up north along the coast, we have Caesarea. This is Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea by the sea. Caesarea because it's Caesar's, the Kaiser's city. We'll have more to say about it in just a little bit. Then from Caesarea, we can move up again. Now, remember, this little projection out into the Mediterranean here, this is Mount Carmel. And it forms this little bay here. And right on the side of Mount Carmel, really out here inland just a little bit, is Megiddo. So it's number 3 and number 18. Number 3 is Mount Carmel. Then later on in the book, it's going to come to number 18, which is Megiddo. Just across the bay, over here on the other side, is Haifa. So, as we just think about these 4 cities along the coast, Tel Aviv, Caesarea, well, Mount Carmel isn't a city, but there are villages up here on the mountain, and then Haifa. Tel Aviv is a very, very modern, urban setting, lots of theaters, coffee houses, art galleries, very kind of, I don't know, hip, stylish, up-to-date, lots of high-rise buildings. This is Tel Aviv. It's the modern, really going, partying city. Haifa is also a modern city, but this is the industrial center of Israel. Lots of factories. Since this is the only natural bay that Israel has, this is where a huge part of the shipping takes place. So you've got a very modern Tel Aviv kind of play place. You've got a hard-working Haifa. And with those 2 cities, there's one more kind of major city, of course, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the holy city. So they play in Tel Aviv, they work in Haifa, and they worship in Jerusalem. That's kind of a saying about Israel. Those 3 cities are huge, major cities. Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. Okay, so we just stopped here at Haifa, and we worked our way up the coast. Just across from Haifa is Akko on the other side of this bay. Haifa on one side, Akko on the other side. Akko is also sometimes spelled A-C-R-E, like acre, but it's Acre or Akko. Acre or Akko. Anybody here really a history buff? Not so much? Okay. So in the Middle Ages, you know, there was the Crusades. And from Europe, Christian armies rose up and they came to the Holy Land to try to evict the Muslims from the Holy Land, because the Muslims had taken charge of the holy sites and they weren't allowing Christian pilgrims to come in and worship at those sites. This was the main purpose behind the Crusades. The Crusaders actually held the Holy Land for 2 different periods of time, roughly around 1000 AD, okay? Around 1000, before and after. One of their major capitals was at Akko. So Akko is not that important in the Bible. It is mentioned a couple of times, but it's not a big important city for biblical studies. But it's a huge important city if you're into Crusader history. Okay, now from here we've moved all the way northward up the coast. We're going to move inland. So we're looking here on the shore of this body of water. Who can tell me what this body of water is? Sea of Galilee, right. So over here on the west side of the Sea of Galilee is the city of Tiberias. Tiberias. Named after Tiberius Caesar. Okay, here's another Caesar, Caesarea, Caesar, Tiberius. So these Roman emperors were such humble men that they like to name cities after themselves. Okay, and we find this all over the ancient world. And, well, even here. Okay, we've got states named after presidents, right? And cities and towns named after presidents and important people. That's always been the case. Tiberius. Tiberius is not mentioned in, well, it is mentioned in the Bible, but just in a very minor way in the New Testament. It's not mentioned by this name in the Old Testament. If it's in the Old Testament, it would go by a different name. But we read about it in the New Testament. The Sea of Galilee is also called the Lake of Tiberias, because Tiberias had become a very major town, I guess we'd say, on the Sea of Galilee. It was so big and so important that it actually lends its name to this lake. So the lake or Sea of Tiberias or the Sea of Galilee, another name for it is Kinneret. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. Another important, and then here's the Sea of Galilee, as we said, number 7. These numbers, by the way, correspond to the numbers in your book for the sites. The Mount of Beatitudes. Okay, so the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Blessed are you when men persecute you. These are the Beatitudes. That was given from a location on the west shore of the Sea of Galilee. The Mount of Beatitudes is located just over here on this kind of northwest shore. And we'll visit that site on our tour. It was a site that was visited frequently by the Lord. Tabcha, just to the south of the Mount of Beatitudes. This is where you had the miracle, the feeding of the 5,000. Tabcha. And then up here on the very northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee, the very important city, Capernaum. Capernaum becomes the headquarters of Jesus' ministry during his Galilean part of his ministry. So look at how many spots there are, important places right up here around the Sea of Galilee. And we'll spend a good deal of our tour around the Sea of Galilee. Just to the north, now from here, I'll mention it now, we'll mention it again in a little while. The Sea of Galilee is well below sea level already. And from here, as you're going up the Jordan River, you're going uphill, because Mount Hermon is right up here, very close by. So it's very, very steep. And as you're going up this hill, there's Chorazin. Chorazin we will visit. This is one of the towns that Jesus actually prophesied against. Woe to you, Chorazin! For if the miracles had been done in Sodom and Gomorrah that have been done in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. So Jesus did great miracles in Chorazin, but Chorazin did not repent. And we can see the ruins of that town today. Gergasa, the casting out of the demons from the demoniac, and they're going into the herd of pigs that went down and plunged into the Sea of Galilee. We'll see this location on our tour. It's where there is a cliff that runs right down into the Sea of Galilee. And you can look at it and you can just picture in your mind the events that are taking place in the Bible there. Number 13, over here, just to the west of the Sea of Galilee is one of my favorite places to visit, just because it's such a beautiful view from up here. Mount Arbel. Mount Arbel gives you a view right way from high cliffs up above the Sea of Galilee. You can look down in this whole valley here, and then you can look north, and you can look south, you can look to the west, and even see on a good clear day the Mediterranean. When I say a good clear day, one of the big problems they have in Israel is not so much air pollution from like smog and smokestacks and things like that, although there's some of that in Tel Aviv, Haifa, but the biggest problem they have are sandstorms, because there's lots of desert around here. When the wind conditions are just right, sand from Egypt will get kicked up into the atmosphere and carried into Israel. Sometimes that obscures the vision a bit. So sometimes you have nice clear days you can just see for miles and miles and miles. Other times it kind of gets obscured. So we'll see what our view is like when we're there this year. But Mount Arbel is a beautiful, beautiful hike up to the top of the mountain there. Banyas. Banyas is up in the far north. It's actually the other Caesarea. It's Caesarea Philippi. Banyas. Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi. This is where Christ made his great profession of Christ. Thou art the Christ, the Son. Yeah, what did I say? I said something else, didn't I? Never mind what I said. Just pay attention to what I mean. Where Peter made his great profession of Christ. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. It was an ancient site for the worship of Pan, but the Arabs can't pronounce the letter P. And so Pan got corrupted to Ban, and it takes the name Banyas. Banyas. And we will see this ancient site. Now, from the sea region around the Sea of Galilee, if we head back westward again, out here in the center, very close to the place where Jesus was raised, right next door really to Nazareth, is the city of Sepphoris. Sepphoris was a Greek city. Well, I don't know if it was technically a Greek city, but it was a very well-to-do city, let me say that. And there were many, many wealthy kind of mansions with rich mosaic tiles in them, in Sepphoris. And it's, as I said, next to Nazareth. Today, Nazareth is one of the largest cities in Israel, but in Jesus' day, it was one of the tiniest. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Nazareth was just a hole in the wall. It was nothing. But because it is the place where Jesus was raised, it has been hugely important over the centuries. Obviously, it was very important to the Crusaders. And since the time of the Crusades, it's continued to be an important location of many of the Christians who live in Israel up into modern times. So when we get to Nazareth on our tour, you'll see a huge city. And it's sprawling. It's out over all kinds of hills and valleys. But the Nazareth of Jesus' day was just a tiny village. Okay, coming down the Jordan Valley now, working our way southward, Bet She'an. Bet She'an. This is the house of She'an. There are a number of places that start with the word Bet. Bet is the Hebrew word for house. Bet or Beth. So Bethlehem, Bethlehem is the house of bread. This is Bethlehem. And here's Bet She'an. Bet She'an. Okay, then we come right down here in the center of the city. Here's where Jerusalem is. Now, if you're wondering what this demarcated place is here, with a line around it, this is what's called the West Bank. And the Jerusalem on this map is inside the West Bank. That's East Jerusalem. West Jerusalem is just across the line, outside of the West Bank. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. The dot is actually probably should be moved over to where it's right on the line, but then it'd be hard to see. That's so that you know what's going on here. And when Israel, in the 1948 war, fought against the Arabs, they worked hard to gain this, this corridor that you see sticking in here to bring them into West Jerusalem. In the UN partition plan, Jerusalem was to be an international city, neither Jewish nor Arab, and its status to be decided on in later negotiations. But when the United Nations made the offer of this deal to the Jews and the Arabs, the Jews said, yeah, we'll take it. The Arabs said, no way. And so they went to war. And so the UN status was based upon the acceptance of the partition plan by the Arabs. They said no. So basically that UN partition plan is no good. It was never in effect. It was not agreed upon by the two parties. So a war ensued instead. And so Israel asserts that their right to Jerusalem as their capital is based both on history, because it's their ancient historic capital, and based on the right they have by virtue of the means they conquered it in the war. East Jerusalem was occupied by Jordan. It wasn't given to Jordan by the United Nations. It was occupied. West Jerusalem occupied by Israel, East Jerusalem occupied by Jordan. Then in 1967, Israel fought another war, and they liberated East Jerusalem. So now they say Jerusalem is the unified capital of Israel forever. And the United States has finally recognized that. Congress did so about 20 years ago by passing a law recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and mandating the moving of the United States Embassy. And as you know, it wasn't until just this last year that the embassy was actually moved. But that's, you know, there's a lot of politics involved in this. There's a lot of upset and worry in the world over the status of Jerusalem. We'll have a lot more to say about that when we get to Jerusalem. Bethlehem, there's that other Bet, house. Lechem is the Hebrew word for bread. Bethlehem, the house of bread, Bethlehem. And just to the east of Jerusalem is Bethany, the hometown of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Bethany. There's another Beth, Bet Ani. Ani is humility. This is the house of humility. Bet Ani. Would you like to live in the house of humility? That's a nice sounding name for a place. Okay, down here by the Dead Sea is Masada. Masada, where the Jewish rebels made their final stand against the Romans in the first war against Rome. And we will be up on top of Masada. En Gedi, En, E-I-N. You'll see a lot of place names with E-I-N. That's the Hebrew word for spring. Spring of water. And this is down in the Judean wilderness. Remember we talked about those 12 geographical regions last time? This is very arid, very dry all down here. There's hardly anything grows. But there is a spring. There's an oasis up in the canyon where the water comes flowing down over waterfalls. It's very beautiful. In the sides of the cliffs, there are caves. This is where David hid out when he was fleeing from Saul. Remember, Saul went into the cave to relieve himself, and David sliced off the edge of his skirt, and then later was able to say, "Look, King, you know, I could have taken your life, but I was gracious to you. Why don't you stop hounding me?" That happened here in the caves up in Gedi. We'll go up in there and we'll see this. Gedi, the second part of this means the kid of a goat. And there are living in the crags and the mountains and the hills up in these cliffs. It's kind of like a mountain goat type animal. What?
Ibex.
Yeah, the ibex. Thank you. I had a brain fog there. The ibex, I-B-E-X. And the kid of this ibex goat is called Gedi. So Ein Gedi is the spring of the goat kid. And some days we've seen lots and lots of them. Some days we've gone there and it's very difficult to see them. Their coloration blends in perfectly with the mountainsides. And they can be standing in just right almost in front of you, a little distance away, and you can't hardly see them. And then if they turn their head, you say, oh, there it is. And sometimes once you see one, you start picking out some more. Oh, there's one, there's one. Other times we've seen them right up next to the bus even. Okay. So we're at En Gedi. So Masada down here by the Dead Sea. This is where we're going to start. We're going to start down here at the south end of the Dead Sea. We'll see Masada and En Gedi. This is the Dead Sea itself. And then north here, Qumran. Who can tell me what's important about Qumran?
The Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right. This is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And just within the last 2 years, a new 12th cave was discovered. It used to be thought that there were only 11 Dead Sea caves, Dead Sea Scroll caves. A 12th one was discovered, and what they found were jars, broken jars, but no scrolls. So looters had gotten there before the archaeologists and taken all scrolls away. They did find one scroll that had nothing written on it. It had been in the process of being prepared for writing, and it was there. They also found some of the pickaxes the looters had used left there in the cave. So we'll visit Qumran. We'll see it. It's exciting. It's fascinating. Just to the north of the Dead Sea is the city of Jericho. Now notice the location of Jericho here. Notice the location of Bethlehem. Or excuse me, not Bethlehem, but Jerusalem. Jericho and Jerusalem. Okay. Jerusalem is up on top of the Judean mountains. Jericho is down at the bottom of the Syrian African Rift Valley, Jordan Rift Valley. Go from very high to very low. Okay. And look how short of a distance it is. It's a very, very steep road between here. Now, when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, how does it start out? A certain man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho. So this is it. And you can try to picture it in your minds, but when we're there, you'll see it. And many of the priests actually lived in Jericho. And so it is thought that the man in the story may have been a priest or maybe a Levite who had been serving in the temple. Now his time serving in the temple was up and he was going back home to Jericho. That was when he was set upon by thieves. Just outside of Jericho, still in this wilderness area, is a place called Karantal, I should say. Karantal is the traditional site for the temptation of Jesus. So at the beginning of his ministry, he was driven out into the wilderness. He fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. And the devil says, if you're the Son of God, command that this stone become a loaf of bread. Now, that would have happened in this area. Do we know that's where it happened? No. It's the traditional site. It could be. But if it's not the exact place, it'll sure give you an idea of the kind of place. It is in the right region of Israel. Okay, so it was somewhere around there. Here's a place we probably will not visit unless we find extra time for some reason or have to rearrange things. But Lachish was a major city of Judah in the Old Testament. And when the Assyrians came down and threatened King Hezekiah in Jerusalem, they bypassed Jerusalem and went and demolished Lachish. And then they came back and laid siege to Jerusalem, but they weren't able to take Jerusalem. Okay, over here on the west coast to the south of where we started at Tel Aviv is the city of Ashkelon. Ashkelon is an Israeli city. Beersheba. Remember last time we talked about Dan to Beersheba? Dan is basically up here at Banyas, just next door to it. Beersheba, the southernmost habitable place in Israel. Beersheba. Be'er is a word like Ain, except Be'er means a well, not a spring. So a spring has water bubbling up out of the ground. A be'er, a well, you have to dig down to water that's still. It's down in the water table. The be'er shava is the well of the shava. The shava is an oath. So Abraham took an oath, and this was the well of the oath, be'er shava. There's a slight pause between these two e's, be'er, but they usually say it fast enough you don't hear it. Be'er shava, be'er shava. And the B is a V sound. Lots of the B's are V sounds. Okay.
Again.
Yeah.
In the list of sites you didn't have 29 up there, the Valley of Elah?
Oh, Valley of Elah. Yeah.
Where?
Valley of Elah is in the Shfela, and it's kind of be here between Bethlehem and Ashkelon, out in this region out in here. So the Valley of Elah, this is where David fought with Goliath. And it's the closest city to the Valley of Elah. Well, it's actually quite close to Bethlehem. On the other side, you would find Bet Shemesh. Another Bet name. Yeah, that's not on the map. Bet Shemesh is the house of the sun. But Bet Shemesh we read about in the Old Testament when after the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant and they returned it. Remember they hitched it up on this cart to these two cows and they sent it back. And these cows went lowing all the way and they came up the road to Bet Shemesh. And Bet Shemesh is right next door to the Valley of Elah, which is here. Bet Shemesh, Valley of Elah, Bethlehem, Ashkelon down here. This part here is the Gaza Strip. All the down here from Ashkelon on down to this border. This was the region of the Philistines. That's where the Philistines lived in biblical times. They were the people of the sea people. And we think they came from the region of the Greek Isles. And they are known to have come down and come down into the area of Egypt and then up into the southern part of what was at that time Canaan, and then became the land of Israel. And the Israelites were not able to get rid of the Philistines, and the Philistines continued to cause them all kinds of trouble all through the Old Testament, as you know from your reading. Yeah. Good. Does that answer your question? Thanks, Hallie. Okay, so let's go to the first place on our thing here, and on page 6 are a couple of sites we won't talk about. This is for tours that go to Jordan. We went to Jordan once, and so I've got some information about Petra and about Madaba, but I want to start out in Tel Aviv and Jaffa. Notice Tel Aviv dash Jaffa because they're right next door to each other. So on the map here, where you have number 1 Tel Aviv, that's the same location as Jaffa. The two cities actually touch each other, and they're just next door to each other. But Jaffa, or it's sometimes spelled Jaffa, because the letters F and P are the same letter in Hebrew. The only difference is whether it has a dot in the middle of it or not. With a dot in the middle of it, it's pronounced like a P. Without a dot, it's pronounced like an F. So you find it both ways. But Jaffa in the Old Testament, Jaffa in the New Testament. Same city. It's on the west coast along the Via Maris. Now, let's talk about the Via Maris. You have a number of major routes in the Holy Land. The King's Highway was over here on this side, and it was a major north-south route. There was also a route that came from Mesopotamia over here that came across this way up into Asia Minor. It was a major route. A trunk route off that major east-west route came down this way along the sea. It wasn't as major as either the King's Highway or this major east-west, but it was what we might call a trunk route. And it's been given the name Via Maris. Via, by the way of, Maris, the sea, Latin, because it comes down here alongside the sea. And so this would bring you from that main east-west route down this way into Egypt. The alternate route would take the King's Highway down this side and then cross over into Egypt. So it's interesting, when the Israelites came out of Egypt in the Exodus, they didn't go up the Via Maris. They could have. They could have. They didn't because it was heavily fortified by the Egyptians. Instead, they went across this side of the Jordan up here along the other side of the Dead Sea and then entered into the Promised Land, an area that didn't have a lot of Egyptian soldiers along the way. And also by the plan and design of God, a way where the Israelites had to depend on the Lord for their existence. And they learned many, many important lessons because of that. But this is the Via Maris coming along here. So when we talk about Tel Aviv and Jaffa, it is on the coast. It's along the Via Maris, and that's what makes it a pretty important location. Due east of Aphek. Now, point B, this is one of the review questions. To what tribe was this given? And the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan was given a tribal allotment right here in the middle of the coast. But what happened? Was the tribe of Dan able to evict the Canaanites from their possession? The answer is low. Low. No, they could not. And so they remained further up in the mountains. And later on, the book of Judges, I think it is, tells us about their going up here far to the north and kicking out a little Canaanite band up here in the far north that was living at peace up here. And that's why Banyas up here is right next to a region called Dan. One of the sites that we will visit right next door to Banyas is Dan. There's a beautiful nature preserve there. There's an ancient Israelite city. When the north kingdom divided from the southern kingdom under Rehoboam and Jeroboam, Jeroboam did not want his people going back to Jerusalem at the festivals, as Moses had commanded them. So he said, how can I keep my people from going to Jerusalem? He said, I know what I'll do. I'll make two big worship centers. He put one at Dan, the other at Bethel, one at the north end, one at the south end of his kingdom. And there he placed golden calves and commanded Israel to worship Yahweh by those golden calves. So it was not a sin of the wrong God, but it was a sin of idolatry. Later, with King Ahab and his horrible wife Jezebel, they brought in a violation of worshiping the wrong God, and that was the worship of Baal. But with Jeroboam, it was idol worship. So one at Dan, one at Bethel, to keep his people from going down here to Jerusalem. But this was Dan up here. But Dan was originally given territory right here around Tel Aviv, Jaffa. They never could take it. So that's a little confusing. You read about Dan in the Bible, and they've got this place here. Why is Dan way up there in the north? Okay. That's why. They couldn't conquer the Canaanites there. Okay, but Joshua 19:46 talks about the fact that it was allotted to Dan. In 2 Chronicles 2, we have a description of Solomon building his palace and then the temple. So he imported lumber, actually logs, from Lebanon. We call it Lebanon. It was Phoenicia, okay, from Tyre and Sidon. They floated these logs down the Mediterranean from way up north of Israel, floated them down here to Jaffa at Tel Aviv, and there was a port here in Jaffa. Brought the logs on, and then they had to carry them on carts of some sort from Jaffa up here to Jerusalem in the mountains. That was the most difficult part of that voyage, okay, getting those logs up those steep hills. And then they had to make the logs into lumber, and then they could build the palace and the temple. But Solomon was the one who brought cedar trees from Lebanon to the port there at Jaffa. Another mention of Jaffa is in the account of Jonah. So the Lord tells Jonah, I want you to go to where? Nineveh, right? Nineveh. Where is Nineveh? Nineveh, Mesopotamia, upper Mesopotamia. Nineveh is north and east. Where did Jonah go? He went down to Jaffa. He went west. And he got on the ship headed for Tarshish. Where's Tarshish? Nobody knows. There's lots of guesses. It might be in the Greek Isles. It might be as far away as Germany or Spain, but it was to the west. Okay, and that's really all we know with certainty about Tarshish. But Jonah fled from the presence of the Lord, and he did so here at Tel Aviv and Jaffa. Later on, when Ezra rebuilt the temple, this is the second temple now. First temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. Jews spent 70 years in Babylonian captivity. They returned to Jerusalem by decree of Cyrus and were granted permission to rebuild the temple. Ezra had a huge part in this. And according to Ezra chapter 3, verse 7, once again, they imported cedars from Lebanon to the port in Jaffa. So just like Solomon had done. In the intertestamental period, Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus Epiphanes, sometimes pronounced Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the Greek ruler, descended from one of the generals of Alexander the Great, who was ruling in Syria. He had a huge campaign against the Jews, because the Jews stood in his way between Syria and the Ptolemies down in Egypt. And Antiochus just wasted the Jews. We are told that he drowned 200 Jews in the Jaffa harbor. So that happened in Jaffa. In the New Testament, Peter is seen at Jaffa. And there is where he raises Tabitha. Tabitha was that widow who was rich in all these works and making all these blankets and coats and things for the poor people. And she died, and they called on Peter to do something. And he raised her from the dead, Acts chapter 9. So there's a New Testament person who was in Jaffa, Peter. Also, Peter is found in the next chapter at the house of Simon the tanner, where he receives his vision about the sheep being lowered down from heaven. You remember that? It was full of all kinds of unclean animals. And the Lord says to him, "Rise, Peter, slay and eat." And Peter has the audacity to tell the Lord no. I always think that's funny. So 3 times he tells the Lord no. And finally, the Lord convinces him that it's all right. What the Lord has pronounced clean, you should not call unclean. And just then, Peter hears the knocking at the door. He hears these Gentiles asking him to come up to the house of Cornelius, which is in Caesarea or Caesarea Maritima, which we'll come to next after the break. We're going to take a break here in just a few more minutes. Okay, let's just go over some of these other things. During the Byzantine period, the Jewish community suffered periodic massacres. The Byzantines, okay, let me just identify them for you. We'll talk a lot about the Byzantines from time to time, but this is after the New Testament. After the Romans accept Christianity, which happened under Constantine, that doesn't mean they were saved, doesn't mean they were born again necessarily, but they at least outwardly recognized Christianity. Some of them, no doubt, were born again. But Rome kind of adopted Christianity as its state religion. It became known as the Byzantine Empire because its capital shifted from Rome to Byzantium. So it's known as the Byzantine Empire. So Christianized Rome. You've got the Roman period and the Byzantine period. So this is starting in the 4th century AD. So the Byzantines, it says here, in the Byzantine period, the Jewish community suffered periodic massacres. The Byzantine Christians were not always kind to the Jews, unfortunately. But they did tend to get along with the Jews better than the later Crusaders did. J, during the Muslim period, Jaffa became the port city, the provincial capital of Ramla. During the Crusader period, the Jewish community of Jaffa was destroyed. Now, 1799, we're getting up at the really modern times here. 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte took the city. He slaughtered 2,000 prisoners of war who were Arabs and Jews. The regiment that was responsible caught leprosy and all but 7 died. Interesting little historical fact. In 1820, there was a revival of the Jewish community in Jaffa and the building of a synagogue and a hostel by Isaiah Ajiman of Constantinople. So this is in the 1820s, we have the early stages of the modern Zionist movement going on here. And you have Jews beginning to come back into the land. Now, there were always some Jews in the land, but around this time, you have Jews in earnest filtering back in, especially from Eastern Europe. March 28th, 1917, the Turks expelled the Jews. 1917, what's going on at this time? World War I. Okay, Turks. Okay, this is the Ottoman Empire, expelled the Jews, but the Jews returned immediately after the British conquest. So just for a brief period of time during World War I, the Jews had been forced out. Under the British mandate, Jaffa was an Arab city until 1948. This was Israel's Great War for Independence. And in 1948, the Arabs told the Arab inhabitants of Jaffa, don't worry, just leave your homes. We're going to push the Jews into the Mediterranean, and as soon as we're done with them, you can come back and live in your homes in peace. Well, they didn't count on God sovereignly giving the Jews a victory. They knew the Jews had no chance. The Arabs were better armed, better equipped, better trained. Everything was stacked against the Jews in the War of 1948. There was no way, humanly speaking, that the Jews could possibly have won that war. And it was one of the great miracles of history, the victory of the Jews over the Arabs in 1948. And so it is a city of Israel, but after the Jews won it, they allowed Arabs to come back and inhabit their homes, and those Arabs became citizens of Israel. Some of the very earliest citizens of Israel were these Arab inhabitants of Jaffa. So that's Jaffa. Let's just take a look at a couple of pictures here. Here's the port of Jaffa, the Sea of Jaffa. These palm trees up on the hillside. There's a minaret from a mosque. This is out in the Mediterranean Sea. Here's an aerial view. This is the port. Okay, it's got a little sea break here, but this is the same spot from which Jonah would have set out for Tarshish, this port of Jaffa. And we'll see this. There are still fishing boats that go in and out from here, but it's just there's not a natural bay there. They have to build this man-made sea break in order to have calm enough waters to keep their boats there. There's another picture of the harbor. There's some fishing boats there. This is the traditional site of Simon the Tanner's home. And there's a church built there. Whether it's the real site of Simon the Tanner's home from the first century or not, nobody knows. But it's close by the right area. I've been in it once. The current owner doesn't like to let tour groups in. So I haven't been in it for years, but we've driven past it. It's just a place, it's whether you get to go in it or not is not that big of a deal. To me, the more important things are the things that are historically accurate, the lay of the land. Whatever the case, if Simon the Tanner's home was there, it didn't look like this. Okay, This is a more recent building on the same site. So one of the things you always wonder about on these tours is, well, is this the authentic site? Is this the real site? And we can go back and forth and talk about that a lot. We can give arguments for and against a lot of these sites. But at the end of the day, what does it really matter? If the building you're looking at is built on the same site that was there 2,000 years ago, because the building you're looking at wasn't the same building that was there then. And so it's much, this is why I like the region around Galilee so much. Much more wide open spaces, maybe fewer buildings. You know, groups always move in, Crusaders, Byzantines, the Catholics, they all want to build churches over every place that's significant. So they build this big church and they cover up the part that you want to see, you know. So up in Galilee, you've got a lot more wide open spaces. You really get a good feel for the lay of the land. And you get that everywhere else too. But just to say, what we're looking at here is just a building. And we can talk about whether it's authentic or not, but at the end of the day, what does it matter? We know that Simon received a vision in Jaffa. Okay. And it might have been right here. And then right adjacent to Jaffa is Tel Aviv. And here's the modern city. You see the high-rise hotels there. You see the beach. This is where everybody's having fun, playing, having a great time on a nice sunny day on the Mediterranean. There's from the other side, you can looking out at Mediterranean here, these same high-rise hotels here. Big modern city, Tel Aviv. And when we come back from a break, we will talk about the next site, which is Caesarea. But I want to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at, it says 7 minutes after, we'll go at 17 after, and we'll start up again. Okay, so we'll just be taking 10 minutes off. Okay, so we're starting our live feed up again, and we're just about to get started. People are filtering back in from the break. The next stop on this talk, it's going to move north up the coastline from Tel Aviv and Jaffa, and the next stop is the city of Caesarea or Caesarea. And on the slide here, you can see it says this is the city of 4 P's, the city of 4 P's. And you can think about Caesarea in relation to 4 people in the Bible whose names all start with P. So we have Pilate. Pilate, the Roman governor who sentenced Jesus to death. Why should we think about him in relation to Caesarea? Because we know that he tried Jesus in Jerusalem, right? But his palace was actually Caesarea or Caesarea. Caesarea had been built in honor of Caesar, and it had a major palace. This was the location of whoever was governing Judea on behalf of Rome had his center of government here in this location. So even though in the Bible we find Pilate in Jerusalem, he was actually visiting Jerusalem at that time. His major place of residence would have been here at Caesarea. A second P here is Philip. Philip the evangelist. Philip had 4 daughters who were what? Prophetesses. And they lived in Caesarea, according to the book of Acts. So that's the second P in the New Testament we find in Caesarea. First Pilate, then Philip. The third P stands for Paul. This is the Apostle Paul. So who can tell me, how is Paul related to Caesarea? Anybody? Yes. So after Paul was arrested in Jerusalem, Remember, there was a plot against Paul's life, and all these Jews took an oath that they would not eat anything until they'd taken Paul's life. And Paul's nephew heard of the plot, reported it to the Roman commander, who then had Paul taken to Caesarea. And there he was in prison for 2 years, under Felix, then under Festus, then under Agrippa. It was from Caesarea that Paul appealed his case to Rome, and eventually he set sail for Rome. And of course, you've got the whole thing about the shipwreck and being stranded on Malta and finally ending up in Rome. But that all goes from Caesarea. So Pilate, then Philip, then Paul. The fourth P associated with Caesarea is Peter. Peter. So when is Peter found in Caesarea? We just talked about Peter in Jaffa, right? And in Jaffa, Peter raises Tabitha from the dead. He also receives a vision about this sheet filled with unclean things. That's to the south, down in Jaffa. But from Jaffa, after Peter's vision, where did he go with those Gentiles? The house of Cornelius, who lived in Caesarea. Okay, so Peter actually goes to Caesarea. This is where the gospel was first preached to Gentiles. Caesarea. Today, Caesarea is an archaeological site that we'll visit. There's also a modern city there. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has his home in Caesarea. And there are a lot of wealthy people that have very nice, big, expensive homes in Caesarea. It's a beautiful spot right on the Mediterranean, gentle sea breeze, beautiful weather, palm trees. You know, it's a very nice place to live, I'm sure. So as we think about Caesarea, take a look at some of these facts in your booklet, page 7 on your booklet. Number 1, it was built by Herod the Great in honor of Augustus Caesar, named Caesarea Maritima. Maritima meaning by the sea. So Caesarea by the sea. Caesar's city by the sea. Number 2, it became the Roman and Byzantine capital of Judea, and all Roman procurators made their headquarters in Caesarea. So Roman and Byzantine. It's basically Rome, pagan Rome and Christian Rome, Roman and Byzantine. Comes the Byzantine Empire in the 4th century. All Roman procurators made their headquarters in Caesarea. Herodian aqueduct brought water from Shuni Spring, Nahal Taninim, Crocodile River at Mount Carmel, and Kabara Springs, Marshland. Now, if you look on your line map, and you see the little bump out here, which is Mount Carmel, poking out into the sea. And you see down here where from Jerusalem, if you go out to the sea, there's Tel Aviv. Roughly, it's not exactly, but roughly halfway up Caesarea. Okay, so Herod had to bring fresh water to Caesarea. There's no natural source. So he had to ship water in from an aqueduct all the way from up here by Mount Carmel. We'll see a picture of that aqueduct in just a few moments. And we'll get to go right up to that aqueduct, touch it, feel it, see it when we're on our tour. But this is what this is talking about, point number 3, the Herodian aqueduct. Last week I mentioned King Herod the Great, master builder, the crazy man. He was a crazy man, but he was intelligent, and he was had all kinds of amazing building projects all through the Holy Land. Okay, number 4, Hadrian had a second aqueduct alongside the Herodian to increase the water supply. Number 5, we mentioned this already, was the home of Philip the Evangelist, Acts chapter 8, and mentioned again in Acts chapter 21, one of the 4 P's. Paul stopped at Caesarea on his way to Tarsus, Acts 9:30. That's even before his imprisonment. So he stopped there briefly, Acts 9, verse 30. Point number 7, Cornelius and his household were the first Gentiles to receive the gospel, as Peter then, in obedience to the Lord, proclaims the gospel to Cornelius and those in his house. Herod Agrippa. Now, the Herods are, there's Herods all over the place. And there are three generations, at least three generations of Herods that we read about in the Bible. We've got Herod the Great. Herod the Great was the one who was king of the Jews at the time that Jesus was born. He was the one who slaughtered all the babies in Bethlehem. And so Joseph and Mary take baby Jesus and they flee down into Egypt, and they wait until the death of Herod the Great. Then they finally come up, but they did not want to settle in Judea because they heard that Herod was there. This is one of the sons of Herod. So Herod has these sons. There are four of them. They were called tetrarchs. Tetrarch is a ruler of a fourth. From tetra, four, and arche, to rule. Tetrarch. So Herod's four sons are the second generation of Herods. They live and they rule for a while. There's all kinds of problems. One of those Herods is the one who beheads John the Baptist. Because John was telling him it wasn't lawful for him to have his brother's wife. There were two of the sons of Herods. One of them took the wife of the other brother. And John condemned him for that. And John lost his head over the matter. The next generation, third generation, sees Agrippa, Herod Agrippa, ruling in Caesarea, right here. Herod Agrippa. And Herod Agrippa comes to hear the Apostle Paul give his testimony. Now, so we're looking at all these different Herods. Herod the Great, the first one, built the aqueduct to bring water to Caesarea. Point number 8 at the top of page 8, Herod Agrippa died in Caesarea. That is in Acts 12, 19 through 21. That's Herod Agrippa the first. Okay, but there's another Herod Agrippa, possibly a fourth generation. We'll see that in a moment. Number 9, Paul stopped on his way to Jerusalem in Acts 18. 10, Paul stayed in Philip's home in Acts 21, Philip the evangelist. And then Paul was imprisoned for 2 years in Acts 23. Appeared before Felix and Festus, and notice this, Agrippa the second. There's the second Herod Agrippa. All these different Herods. In the year 60, now think about where this fits in terms of our Bibles. 60. Jesus is crucified, what, around 30. 60 to 65 is when most of the New Testament is being written. Well, maybe 60 to 67. Okay. The writings of John, the Gospel of John, the three epistles, and the Revelation happened later in the 90s. Okay, so now we're talking about AD 60. So we have probably, there's a lot of debate over this, but probably at least some of the Gospels have been written. Some of the early books of the New Testament in the late 50s have been written. But much of the New Testament still remains to be written. In the year 60, the killing of several Jews in Caesarea helped spark the Jewish revolt against Rome. So we talk a lot about the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70. This uprising against the Romans by the Jews is beginning here about 60, and it's taking place right here in Caesarea. This is where they rise up in rebellion. And several Jews were killed, and that caused a national uprising. In 66, 20,000 Jews were killed in one day at Caesarea. That's a lot, 20,000. And so the revolt begins in earnest. About 3 or 4 years later, it's put down. In the year AD 70, same year the temple is destroyed, there were 2,500 Jewish POWs were made to fight wild beasts in Caesarea. Number 15, Caesarea became the base for 2 early church fathers, Eusebius and Origen. So those of you who study church history know who these men are. Eusebius is often called the father of church history. He wrote a history of the Christian church in the 4th century. Origen was an Alexandrian Christian leader who commented a lot on scripture, taught the Bible. He had some weird ideas too. Okay, in 639, Caesarea was conquered by the Muslims. Okay, it's in the 600s, early 600s, that Muhammad receives his revelations down in Saudi Arabia. And then his army begins to spread north. So by 639, they're infiltrating throughout the Holy Land and beginning to take over all these places that had been ruled by the Byzantines before. So Caesarea in 639. In 1101, it was conquered by the Crusader king, King Baldwin. So here are Christians, that's Christian in quote marks, okay, Roman Catholic Christians from Western Europe coming to try to liberate the Holy Land from these Muslims. And so they conquered Caesarea in 1101. Then in 1187, it was conquered by the Arabs again, by Saladin, by Muslims. In 1191, it's reconquered by the Crusaders. So back and forth, back and forth. 1291, it's conquered by the Sultan Berbers and gradually went into decline. Okay, so it's Muslim, Christian, then Muslim.
When you say Muslim, is that Muslim?
Yeah, Muslim, Muslim, same. Yeah. Two different ways of spelling it. It's Arabic.
Okay.
And so when it comes across from Arabic into English, kind of depends on what standard you're using to transliterate those words. So you see Muslim and you see Muslim means the same thing. And, well, the M on the front takes the verb and turns it into a participle, making it a noun. The SLM, Muslim, Muslim, you have the same root in the word Islam, I-S-L-M. SLM is the root which means, this is so ironic, means peace. Okay, so they call it a religion of peace. That's actually built into the name. A Muslim means a peaceful man. And Islam means a peaceful religion. Okay, the irony, of course, is obvious from the history of the people. In Hebrew, we say shalom. In Arabic, salam. Salam means peace. And it's a greeting. Greet a Muslim, you say salam. Okay, where were we? Number 21. Oh, we're at the end now. In the late 19th century, okay, now we're getting right up to modern times, Jewish immigrants from Bosnia founded a village in Caesarea. And it's been mostly Jewish ever since then. So here we've got a few slides of Caesarea here. Here is an aerial view. You see this peninsula sticking out. That's all man-made. This other peninsula here to the north, this is on the right-hand side is south, left-hand side is north. You're going northward up the Mediterranean here. These two peninsulas mark the two sides of the man-made harbor that Herod the Great built. And in building this man-made harbor, Herod the Great, back in BC, was already using underwater concrete. He's an amazing builder.
Herod did this?
Yeah, Herod did this. Mm-hmm.
In what year?
This was before, this is BC.
Oh, good.
Okay, BC.
Oh, wow.
Okay, there was a temple for Augustus Caesar, and here's what remains of it, what has been excavated. This amphitheater is amazing. This is looking from the west to the east. If you're sitting up in these seats, which we will, you look out on the Mediterranean. And it was used in the time of Christ by the Romans to put on plays, have concerts. It's even used today for plays and concerts. And it's an amazing thing. It is constructed so perfectly that a person can stand at the focal point of this shape and speak in a whisper and be heard up in the seats. Okay. Here's one of our tour groups sitting up in the, look, there's a young Tom Meyer right there. That's him.
Wow.
Here's some more of our students here that were on the tour that year. Okay. This is the aqueduct we talk about, bringing water all the way down from Mount Carmel. And here's some tourists up here walking on top of it. But this, you can see the Roman construction with these arches. Beautiful work, beautiful work. It stretches for miles and miles, bringing water to Caesarea. There's some of our students standing in the archway of Herod's aqueduct with the Mediterranean in the background. Beautiful picture, huh? Now, in 1961, this was a huge discovery. Skeptics, of course, like to say, well, the Bible's just a book of myths, stories made up. So, when we find things archaeologically that support the Bible, we get a little bit excited about that. We shouldn't, because the Bible's true whether we find anything in history or not. We know it's true because it's the Word of God. But if it's true, we should expect to find in the archaeological record some record of that. And we do. This was discovered in 1961. It was the first time that a reference to Pontius Pilate was found outside of the Bible. And it is simply a limestone inscription called the Pilate inscription. And translated, it reads, "To Tiberius Caesar from Pontius Pilate, the prefect of Judea." So it just helps us to have confidence. I mean, we don't need it, but it's interesting. We've got this historical confirmation of what we're reading in our Bible. So Tiberium Pontius Pilatus Praefectus Judea. And that's the Latin. There's Tiberius right there, Tiberium. That right there, you can kind of make it out, Pilatus. There it is up closer. Tiberium Pilatus. Okay. All right. So from Caesarea, let's move up the coast north even further. We started at Tel Aviv and Jaffa. We moved up to Caesarea. Now we're going to go up to Mount Carmel. That's that part that juts out into the Mediterranean, forming that natural bay. This is a view of Mount Carmel from the south. So you've got this plain, and all of a sudden this mountain juts up. And it's long, and we're not even looking at the whole thing here. Mount Carmel is actually a short mountain range, and it's got numerous kind of peaks and valleys along the top of it. And Mount Carmel figures into the biblical account in a number of places. Let's take a look at our booklets. The name Carmel comes from Kerem, which means vineyard, and El, which is the Hebrew name for God. Kerem El is the vineyard of God. Kerem El comes across as Carmel. Now, my other daughter, Charity, when she went with us to Israel, she is so excited about Carmel. She said, well, I'm going to have a caramel candy when we're on Carmel. And she brought along a bag of caramel candies just to have when we were on Mount Carmel. There is a restaurant up on Mount Carmel that has some of the best falafels in all of Israel. It's run by by a Druze family, and that's where she had her caramel candies after we had falafels there. But what's that?
What's this falafel?
A falafel? Oh, falafel is it's Jewish fast food. Well, I said Mediterranean fast food or Arabic fast food. It's served in a pita bread. They make these. It's dough that's made from chickpeas, garbanzo beans, with spices mixed in with it and fried in oil. And then you put those in the pita along with like hummus and some other sauce and vegetables and stuff that whatever you want to add to it. And you eat it in that pita. And it's really delicious. Yeah. What's that?
Way better than it sounds.
Yeah, it is. It's way better than it sounds. Yeah, I probably didn't do it justice by trying to describe it like that. Okay. But falafel, they have them all. That's, yeah, it's fast food in Israel, I guess. Okay. Carmel, the vineyard of God. And this is the ancient vineyard region of Israel, where lots of grapes were grown. So this is not too far from the vineyard that Ahab stole, and that's a very well-known vineyard, just across the Jezreel Valley from there. This is the region of Israel where lots of the grapes grew. There's another region down in the Shasta also for growing grapes. But number two, this interrupts Israel's Mediterranean coast and creates the Bay of Haifa. We've already pointed that out. Okay, so when you look at the coastline of Israel, it's very smooth line. This is one of the reasons why Israel has never been a maritime giant. The Israelis, even though they have all this coastline, they weren't seagoing peoples. The seagoing peoples were from like the Greek Isles. You look at the coast of Greece and of Turkey, and it's all carved up. It's all jagged. It's got all these little harbors where people can find protection from the storms. And so the Greek people and the Turkish people, the Anatolians, they were the seagoing peoples. Israel, no good harbors there. The best harbor they've got is this Haifa. It's a great big open thing. It's not a lot of protection. So that's what we're talking about here when we say that Mount Carmel interrupts Israel's Mediterranean coast and creates the Bay of Haifa. The elevation of the mountain is 1,810 feet above sea level. So that's not real high, but it starts right out at the Mediterranean. So it doesn't start, it starts right at sea level. So these cliffs go up almost 2,000 feet, 1,810 feet. Mount Carmel was taken by Joshua in Joshua 12, verse 22, part of the conquests of the Israelites as they went in under General Joshua. And Mount Carmel was allotted to the tribe of Asher. Asher is one of the tribes we don't read a lot about in the Bible, but they were up there in around Mount Carmel. I've been reading through the book of Judges recently in my own devotions, and I just came to the conclusion that, in fact, this morning when I was reading, Judah doesn't fit into the picture very largely in the book of Judges. They do a little bit, but it's almost like the book of Judges is a proof to Israel. Look, if you want to look to rulers outside of the tribe of Judah, good luck. This is what you're going to get. And they're weird. The judges, they were strange, oddball people that were not what you'd expect of godly heroes. And the whole period of Judges is just odd, isn't it? Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And they weren't really following God. How did they get onto that? Oh, Asher, tribe of Asher. This was a lot of the book of Judges takes place up around the Jezreel Valley, which is bordered on its west side by Mount Carmel. But the tribe of Asher, you don't read a lot about it, but it was given Mount Carmel. This is the site of the contest between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. So when Ahab and his wife, the wicked Jezebel, bring in worship of Baal from Phoenicia, Elijah challenges these prophets. And they have this big contest. Who can send fire to consume the sacrifice? The prophets of Baal spend all day dancing and chanting and slashing themselves, and doing all these things, trying to bring down fire. And it doesn't come, it doesn't come, it doesn't come. And you've all read the story. And Elijah has them dump buckets and buckets of water on his sacrifice, and he simply says a simple prayer, and God set the fire down. And then so all the priests of Baal were slain. That's taking place on this mountain, and because of that, in honor of that, there is an order of the Catholic Church called the Carmelites. Carmelites, and their headquarters are on Mount Carmel. And they named their order after really that contest between Elijah and Baal taking place on Mount Carmel. We will visit the monastery, the Carmelite monastery there, because it's one of the best places to get a view of Israel. From the rooftop of the Carmelite monastery up on top of Mount Carmel, you can look north, south, east, and west. It's amazing. It's really better, if possible, than the view from Mount Arbel. But Mount Arbel is prettier than the monastery. So they're both great ways to view the land of Israel. Number 7, Bir El Muhraka is nearby and may have provided water for the sacrifice. So Bir like Be'er is a well, Bir El Muhraka. This is a spring of water or a well of water. It's where the water table can be achieved. Remember the contest between the prophets of Baal and Elijah took place after 3 years of drought. So where did they get all that water? That's a big question that people try to wonder. The Bible doesn't say, but there is a water site nearby, Bir El Muhraka. That might be. Elisha stayed at Mount Carmel, so Elijah's successor is Elisha. And we're told in 2 Kings 2 and 2 Kings 4 that Elisha stayed there. Mount Carmel is mentioned in the Song of Solomon, everybody's favorite book, right? Okay. Mount Carmel is mentioned a number of times in the prophets, and you can just see the references there. We're not going to take time to look them up. In 107 BC, Carmel was taken by the sons of Hyrcanus. Anybody know who Hyrcanus was? Look at the date, 107 BC. What's going on at this time in the history of Israel? Anybody?
Was that the guy right before the Maccabees?
Yes. It's actually,
He's the first one?
He's the other side, descended from the Maccabees. Okay, so we're talking about Hasmonean kings, John Hyrcanus. Okay, so this is after the temple has been taken back from the Greeks and rededicated at Hanukkah. You have these Maccabean rulers, these Hasmonean rulers. John Hyrcanus, or Hyrcanus was one of them. So John Hyrcanus his sons took Mount Carmel. And then on Mount Carmel are the caves. I've never visited these caves. There's a region of it that we don't really go close to. But if anybody's interested in the study of the Neanderthals, most people, when they think about the Neanderthals, they think about the discovery of Neanderthals in France and Belgium, that region. But many of the Neanderthal discoveries have been made here in Israel at the base of Mount Carmel. And it's a major site for research done into Neanderthals. Just an interesting little factoid thrown in there about Mount Carmel. So we'll spend part of a day on Mount Carmel at the base, at Megiddo, and then up on the mountain itself, the falafel restaurant, the Carmelite monastery. We'll see the place. Tradition says Elijah had his contest with the prophets of Baal. Here's some pictures. Here's from the north. This would be the Bay of Haifa, this indentation here. And then you can see the mountain descending down into the Mediterranean here from the north. And you can see it's all covered with kind of chaparral, low hardwood trees. Here's another picture up in Mount Carmel, one of the valleys there. And it looks a lot like, you know, a lot of mountainsides around here in Northern California that you might see. And the climate is very similar to a Northern California type of climate, especially getting some of the coastal mountain regions, very much like that. Here is this high point here is the traditional site for Elijah's contest with the prophets of Baal. You can't see the monastery very well in this picture, but it's up here at the peak of this mountain. And there is at the Carmelite monastery. This is a statue of Elijah. This is my son David, years and years and years ago. The year that he went there. Okay, and then just across the bay from Mount Carmel, or actually down alongside Mount Carmel, is Haifa. So we talked about Haifa briefly. Haifa is the big industrial city in Israel, and it sits right along the Bay of Haifa, which is formed by Mount Carmel. Take a look at your notes now. And this is the only natural port on the Mediterranean. Okay, and we're back live again. So my apologies to those that are watching on live stream. That was my fault. I failed to plug in the laptop computer and we just simply ran out of power. But we're back on the air again. And we finished talking about Haifa. And we've moved just across the Bay of Haifa to Akko, which is a place we probably will not visit on our tour unless we have to get rearranged. So it's not likely that we'll actually go there. It's an interesting place to see, but it's not that important biblically. There is maybe one or two references to this city in the New Testament, just barely mentioned. But it's for anybody interested in Crusader history, this would definitely be a place a person like that would want to stop and see. Look at the massive walls that were built there by the Crusaders to protect the city from the waves of the Mediterranean. And this is the underground city. And you can see the beautiful Crusader construction. These are Crusader arches. Notice how it has an arch running one way and then 90 degrees to it, an arch running the other way, forming a cross. And this was part of the Crusader architecture, making these beautiful crosses all over the place. Okay, so that is that was over there on the coast. So we started Tel Aviv, we moved north to Caesarea, we saw the Mount Carmel and that bay, and around that bay the cities of Haifa and Akko. Now we want to move inland, moving eastward to the Sea of Galilee, and on the coast of the Sea of Galilee is this city of Tiberias. So I don't have any review questions for Tiberias, but we want to talk about it a little bit because it today is the largest city on the Sea of Galilee. It took on tremendous importance after the fall of Jerusalem, in the centuries after the fall of Jerusalem, as an important center for rabbinic learning. And there's a graveyard there with some very, very important rabbis buried in Tiberias. So if you're looking now at some buildings in Tiberias, and the water there is the Sea of Galilee. So the city of Tiberias comes right down to the seashore. And on your booklets, oh, there's a whole bunch of information in your booklets on Akko. I'm just going to skip that because we're not going to ask a question on the test. You can see there are a few references to Akko on page 9 of your booklet. That's it. Then we come to Roman numeral 6, Tiberias. The town is mentioned only once in Scripture, John 6:23. And it talks about some boats that came from Tiberias, where people came to hear Jesus. And so all it says is that some people came from Tiberias, and that's only mentioned in Scripture by name. The Sea of Galilee was known as the Sea of Tiberias. It's called that in John 6:1 and John 21:1. The city itself was built by Herod Antipas in AD 20, and one of the tetrarchs, in honor of Caesar Tiberius. In New Testament times, it was a completely Gentile town. So this may be one of the reasons why we don't have any mention of it. In fact, some grave sites have been discovered in Tiberias, and it's supposed that because of those grave sites, Jews didn't want to live there because it would be considered lawfully unclean. But later it became a center of Jewish learning. So kind of an interesting thing. Number 5, the Sanhedrin moved to Tiberias after the failed Bar Kokhba revolt and the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 132. So when we think about the revolt of the Jews against Rome, remember it happened in 2 phases. There was the first Jewish revolt beginning in around the early 60s, coming to a culmination in 70. That was when the Jews destroyed the city or when the Romans destroyed the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. Then there was a second revolt in the 100s, culminating in 135. That was led by a messianic figure. Many of the Jews thought he might be the Messiah. He was called Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba is Aramaic, means a son of the stars. And many Jews thought that this must be the Messiah. Bar Kokhba fought valiantly. He won some rather significant battles, but eventually the Romans overthrew Bar Kokhba. So this is point number 5. After the second Roman rebellion failed, the Sanhedrin moved to Tiberias after the failed Bar Kokhba revolt and the destruction of Jerusalem in 132. So the second Jewish revolt doesn't get as much attention oftentimes as the first Jewish revolt, because the first Jewish revolt, destruction of the temple, that's huge. But it was actually the expulsion of the Jews from Judea that had a greater impact on just the history of Judaism and even the history of the church in many respects. This is what brought about what we refer to as the diaspora. Diaspora is a Greek word which means scattered seed. So when the Jews were thrust out of the land, they became the diaspora, scattered throughout the Gentile nations of the world. An event that was first prophesied by Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. And they've been in dispersion ever since then. Since the 1800s, there's been a very significant movement called Zionism, bringing Jews back from the 4 corners of the world into the land of Israel. And that continues to this day. For the last 2 years, just 2 years ago, they finally achieved equal numbers of Jews living in the land of Israel as there were outside of the land of Israel. Prior to 2 years ago, there were actually more Jews living outside of the land of Israel. But it's reached equal status now. And there still are Jews moving in all the time. Tiberias. Point number 6. It became the chief seat of Jewish learning, and both the Mishnah and the Palestinian Talmud were compiled at Tiberias in the 3rd and 5th centuries, respectively. So these are Mishnah, Talmuds. These are records of rabbinic teaching. The Jews teach that when Moses received the law on Mount Sinai, he received 2 versions of the law. One was the written law. That's what we have in the Bible. Then alongside that was given what they call the oral law. The oral law was the interpretation of the written law. And that was not written down. It was passed on orally from generation to generation. Okay, so they say. Okay, it doesn't tell us that in the Bible anywhere, but that's what they say happened. And in the New Testament, we find Jesus taking the Pharisees to task because they did what? They made the commandments of men to violate the commands of God. These commandments of men were the traditions of the elders. The traditions of the elders was the oral law, what they called the interpretation of the law. So as an example, the Bible says you shall honor your father and your mother. And that means, among other things, you take care of them in their old age. But the Jews found a loophole. They said, if you devote a part of your wealth to God, we call it korban, a gift to God, then you don't have to use that to support your parents. Now you can designate it as korban, meaning someday you're going to give it to God, but in the meantime you can use it for yourself. Ultimately you're going to give it to God. It was a loophole to get out of honoring your father and mother, but it was part of the traditions, and Jesus really took the Pharisees to task for that one. And there were several other points of tradition. Now, in the 4th century and later, the traditions of the elders came to be written. And this is what we have in the Talmud and in the Mishnah. Okay, where were we? Tiberius, number 6. Mishnah and the Palestinian Talmud, 3rd and 5th centuries. Tiberias was destroyed in the year 748 by a series of earthquakes. Remember, where are we? We're in the Sea of Galilee. Where is the Sea of Galilee? It's the Syrian-Jordan Rift Valley. What is the Syrian-Jordan Rift Valley? It is the gash in the earth where tectonic plates come together, and you have a lot of earthquake activity in this area. Okay. Another thing makes it like California, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Tiberias was destroyed by earthquakes. 748. It was rebuilt by the Crusaders and was used as the capital of Galilee. And then it was destroyed by the Arabs in the 12th century. Turn the page. Number 10. It was rebuilt by the Jews in 1740s and 1750s under the Sephardic Rabbi Abulafia. Sephardic. What does Sephardic mean?
A Jew from Asia or Africa.
Good. Jew from Asia or Africa. Great. Hasids from Europe came in 1777. The Hasids were from Eastern European countries. Hasidic Jews. 1777. That's interesting. You know, this is early American history, right? So what's going on halfway around the world? You've got the very, very beginnings of the Zionistic movement going on, and it's happening at Tiberias. Tiberias was destroyed by an earthquake again in 1837, but rebuilt by Jews. And Tiberias is the burial place of many leading rabbis. Okay. So here's another picture of Tiberias. Kind of like the other one, we're looking across the part of the Sea of Galilee. You see Tiberias here. In the background, you see the mountains that are going up into northern Israel and then on into Lebanon. To the right would be Mount Hermon. And I think you can maybe see a little bit of snow on Mount Hermon right here. There's an ancient synagogue in Tiberias, and this mosaic tile floor is fairly well preserved right here. The synagogue at Hamat, Tiberias, had a long and varied history. The remains on view today belong to the Severus synagogue, built between 337 and 286 BC. That's pretty old. Period when the Sanhedrin and Assembly of 71 ordained scholars, which served as both the legislature and as the Supreme Court, met in Tiberias. Draws its name from one of the Greek inscriptions found here. The most beautiful feature of the synagogue is the mosaic floor, the oldest discovered in Israel. The mosaic has 3 panels. The central panel has a large zodiac. Does that surprise you? Actually, there are a number of synagogues in Israel that feature zodiacs.
Astrology.
Yeah, that's astrology. Weird, huh?
Yeah, very odd.
Okay. You can go into a number of American churches today and find some things about the decor that would probably be surprising to a lot of Christians from other parts of the world. They'd say, how could such a pagan thing be in a church? So when it comes to interior decorating, people choose what they think looks pretty. Yeah, so even in synagogues. Okay, central panel has a large zodiac with Helios at the center, steering his celestial chariot towards the sun. Okay. Now, let's talk about the Sea of Galilee for a little bit. So we were just talking about Tiberias. Here it is, just halfway down the west side of the Sea of Galilee. We can divide the Sea of Galilee into 4 quarters like this and talk about each of these quarters, kind of. We've got a kind of a northwest region here, northeast region over here, southwest region, and a southeast region. In the northeast, you have the towns of Bethsaida. In the northeast, the Jordan, this is the upper Jordan, enters. And over here on this northeast side is the Gadarene demoniac. Okay, so the demoniac, they had the demons cast out of them that went into the herd of swine. That was up here in this northeast quarter. The southeast, this long coastline here, is the Golan Plateau. So from the Sea of Galilee, it rises up into the Golan Heights. And you read a lot about the Golan Heights. Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria. And prior to that, the Syrians had lots of bunkers up here on the Golan Heights, and they would fire down at the Israeli farmers down below. And so they are strategically important to Israel. I don't think Israel will ever give the Golan back to Syria. Hippos is here. Hippos is was a Greek city at the time of Christ, also known as Susita. Hippos is the Greek word for a horse. The Hebrew word for horse is Sus. So Hippos, Susita, those are the 2 names of the same place. It's an unusual city. It's up on a big, tall hill. And it might be what Jesus had in mind when he talked about a city on a hill cannot be hid. He may have been referring to Hippos. Or he may have been referring to something like Bethsaida over here on this hillside. But very likely Hippos. The Gadara harbor is down here, the place where the swine went down into the Sea of Galilee. That's the southeast corner. Then if we move over here to the southwest, here's where we find Tiberias, we were just talking about. And the outlet of the Jordan comes out down here and gives us the lower Jordan River. When we move up here to the northwest now, this is probably the most significant region of the Sea of Galilee for the New Testament. So up here we have Capernaum. Capernaum was the headquarters of Jesus for his Galilean ministry. He lived and worked out of Capernaum. And we have the feeding of the 5,000 took place along the shoreline here. You have the Sermon on the Mount taking place up in here. You have the feeding of 5,000, multiplication of the fish and loaves and so forth. Gennesareth is here. This is the Sea of Galilee. And just take a look now at your books. As for the size of the Sea of Galilee, point number 1, it's 13 miles long and up to 8 miles wide at its widest part here at Magdala. The Sea of Galilee already starts out 692 feet below sea level, making it the lowest freshwater lake on the face of the earth. So there, of course, it goes downhill to the sea, to the Dead Sea. And Dead Sea is going to be like 1,300 feet below sea level. Number 3 is the main water source for the Sea of Galilee is the Jordan River. There are also several underground springs that feed the lake. It's fish prominent in the New Testament narrative. Of course, Peter was a fisherman, and John and James. The fish were famous throughout the Roman Empire and produced a flourishing export trade. So at restaurants around the Sea of Galilee today, you can buy St. Peter's fish. Pretty expensive, but it's good. It's a mild fish. They exported a kind of a fish sauce that was was a delicacy throughout the Roman Empire. Exported all the way to Rome, to all over the Roman Empire. Okay. Number 5, its location in the depths of the Jordan Rift, surrounded by hills, renders it liable to atmospheric downdrafts and sudden storms. We'll read about some of these storms in the Gospels as the disciples are out there and the boat is about to be swamped. On one occasion, they're by themselves. Jesus comes walking to them on the water, and they think they see a ghost. Another time, he's on the boat, but he's fast asleep. And the disciples say, Lord, wake up. We're perishing. Save us. And he says, oh, you have little faith. And he rebukes the wind and the waves. But these storms can be very, very turbulent. Alongside the Sea of Galilee, again in this northwest region, we find the Mount of Beatitudes, traditional site of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, located on the west shore of the Sea of Galilee between Capernaum and Tagba. Tagba, by the way, means 7 springs. We talk about these underwater springs. That's at Tagba. But the Mount of Beatitudes, point number 3, a Catholic chapel was built there in 1939 by the Franciscan sisters with the help of the Italian ruler Mussolini. So we don't think much of Mussolini, but he built a beautiful chapel there, and you can still see it today. Tagba, we just mentioned, 2 miles west of Capernaum on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Again, we're up in this northwest region. Here's Tagba on the map right here on the slide. The ancient Greek name was Heptapegon. Heptapegon. And because of the difficulty of pronouncing Heptapegon in Arabic, it becomes Tabga. So 7 springs. Today only 6 have been discovered, which has become corrupted into the modern name. Heptapegon becoming Tabga. It's the traditional site of the calling of Peter, Andrew, James, and John. According to Matthew 4, feeding of 5,000 took place here. And Jesus' post-resurrection breakfast, which he fed the disciples in John chapter 21, occurred, we think, at this location. There is a famous church here called the Church of the Miracles of the Loaves and Fishes. It has a very ancient mosaic of the loaves and the fishes on the floor of this church. The first church, Syrian style, was built around 350. It was replaced by the Byzantine church with many mosaics around 450, destroyed by the Persians in 614, Byzantine ruins and mosaics discovered in 1932, and the present church was built as late as 1982. Okay, then we're going to finish up our lecture tonight with Capernaum. Then I've got this 20 to 30 minute video on the Sea of Galilee I want to show you. But Capernaum, right up here in the north part of this northwest region, a very important city. So you'll notice on your sheet with your review questions, possible derivation from the name Capernaum. It may be coming from the Hebrew tomb of Nahum. Kafar in Hebrew is tomb. Kafar, and remember we said before, the F sound and the P sound come from the same letter. So kafar, kapar would be spelled exactly the same. Nahum. Kafar, Nahum would be tomb of Nahum. Nahum in Hebrew is Nahum. Okay, Kafar, Nahum, Capernaum. We don't know with certainty that that's what it means. And we don't know if the tomb of the prophet Nahum is here. The traditional site for the tomb of Nahum, I think, is in Iraq. But we don't know for sure where the prophet is buried. This place name sounds like it. Number 2, it's located on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It was a viable city from the 2nd century BC until the Arab invasion of the 4th century AD. Both Jews and Christians coexisted in Capernaum as late as AD 400, according to Egeria, a nun who visited between 381 and 384. The diary of Egeria is important to those who study the ancient history of the land of Israel, because she made this trip to the Holy Land in the 300s, late 300s, and she kept a diary, and she described all these places that she went to. It's kind of like a travel log. And she says that here, Jews and Christians lived side by side in Capernaum in peace. And much of the rest of the land of Israel, they were kind of at each other's throats. But here they were coexisting side by side. That's one of the questions on the review sheet. The third question, whose house has been excavated? Okay, so this is kind of interesting. The biblical significance of Capernaum, it was the home of both Peter and Andrew, according to Mark 1:29. It was visited by Jesus after the wedding of Cana in John 2:12, and it was the home of a nobleman in John 4:46. Let me jump right down to the answer to our question. If you go down to point number 6 and you see the synagogue, the original synagogue, no, that's not one. Right after number 6, number 7, which is in the house of Peter. In excavations at Capernaum, one residence stood out from the others due to the early 3rd century Christian graffiti and 4th century house built above it. By the 5th century, a large octagonal Byzantine church was built above this, complete with a baptistry. The Byzantines used octagonal buildings as memorials to significant saints. Pilgrims referred to the Byzantine church as the house of the Apostle Peter. So we're fairly certain that this was the house of Peter, or maybe better, Peter's mother-in-law. And there have been artifacts discovered here that date it to a household of the 1st century, but there are also ritualistic artifacts that show that it was used for worship. So that seems to fit the picture. So when we get there, what you'll see is that there's a structure that's built over it. It's been suspended on these big girders so that they can still do the excavations down below, but have a building suspended over the top of it. And there are structures like this in many places throughout Israel in order to protect the archaeology down below. I'm going to come back to the biblical significance, just mentioning some of the things about Capernaum. Point 5D, it was the headquarters for Christ's Galilean ministry. So he spent a lot of time in and around Capernaum. E, notice this, and this is also one of the review questions. A God-fearing Roman centurion built the synagogue in Capernaum. And we'll see the Capernaum synagogue, and there's quite a bit to say about it, but according to Matthew chapter 8 and Luke chapter 7, it was a Roman centurion that built the synagogue there. He underwrote it, paid for the expense. Jesus ministered in that synagogue. Peter's mother-in-law was healed of a fever in Capernaum, according to Mark 1 and Luke 4. Yeah, that's G, 5G. H now, Matthew, okay, the author of the gospel, Matthew had his tax collector's office here in Capernaum. Matthew 9, verse 9. So he becomes a disciple of Jesus and follows him. The discourse on the bread of life in John 6 occurred in Capernaum. Healings were performed there. It was in Capernaum that Jesus sent Peter down to the sea to catch a fish and find in its mouth the coin that would pay both his tax and Peter's tax. That's 5K.
You go fishing?
What's that?
Are you gonna let us go fishing?
Yeah. Well, actually, probably get a chance to cast a net into the sea. And there was a dispute over who was the greatest in Capernaum, Mark 9, among the apostles. And this was one of the 3 cities condemned by Christ. We mentioned Chorazin. Capernaum was another one. Woe to you, Capernaum. Let's just point out a few more details about this synagogue that we mentioned. The original synagogue, the one built by the centurion, was probably built in the 1st century. Okay, the reference to that is in Luke 7. The synagogue that you see today, which is not complete, it's in ruins, but was probably built around 300. So this is just about the end of the Roman period, just about the beginning of the Byzantine period, 300 or later. But it sits on the foundation of the 1st century synagogue, And walls from the earlier synagogue were preserved up to 3 feet high. So when we go to Capernaum, we'll be able to see the lower walls that were almost certainly the walls of the synagogue that was standing when Jesus taught in that synagogue. So that's some pretty authentic stuff, a couple thousand years old. Okay, and then the house of Peter, which we already looked at. Okay, so let me just go through some of these pictures. Here's a boat on the Sea of Galilee, a lot like the boat we'll sail on, with mountains in the back. I believe this is Mount Arbel in the background. Here's some fishermen coming in with their fishing nets. So they've been out probably all night. It's probably early morning. Most of the fishing is done at night. Here's our group on our boat out on the Sea of Galilee. Mount of Beatitudes. That's the chapel that Mussolini built. Close up of it. Here's Dabka, where the 7 springs are. Multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Another view of Tabka from out on the sea. And you can see the church that is built there, right here. The beautiful little shoreline here where you can pick up all kinds of real interesting tiny seashells. And here's the loaves and fishes mosaic that we talked about. There's a little pier that's was built out there. A couple of our tour members years ago. This is looking now at Capernaum. Here is the octagonal structure where Peter's home was. This building over here is the synagogue. Then the view of the synagogue here, what's remaining of it. The lower courses up to 3 feet height from the earliest period. This is looking at the house of Peter. What's left here, some of the walls and so forth. There's the synagogue, and that's what we'll look at tonight. Any questions? Okay, I have a brief video that I want to show you, and it's a good one. I like this. Didn't change anything. Log in again. Okay, you didn't peek and discover my password, did you? Okay.
The Galilee of Israel. How familiar are you with it? Jesus loved it. It's the place where he selected his apostles. It's where he established the headquarters of his ministry. It's where he preached and healed. For a first-hand introduction to this beautiful area of the Holy Land, stay tuned.
I'm going to bypass some of the commercial land.
This is my colleague, Dennis Pollack. We're in the northern area of Israel in a part of the country called the Galilee. This is the area where Jesus grew up and where he concentrated his ministry for 3.5 years.
Below us is the Sea of Galilee. It's actually a very large freshwater lake that's 13 miles long by 8 miles wide. Its average depth is about 150 feet. It's fed by springs and by water that comes from the melting snows of Mount Hermon in the north, on the border with Syria. At the south end, it empties into the Jordan River and flows south to the Dead Sea.
As you can see from this particular sign, another feature of the Sea of Galilee is it's situated below sea level. In fact, it is located far below sea level. It's situated in what is called the Great Rift Valley, the lowest point on the surface of the earth. The sea itself is 700 feet below sea level.
In this program, we want to introduce you to this Galilee area of Israel. We want to give you a sweeping overview of this area that was so important in the life of Jesus.
So let's start with the largest city located on the shores of the sea, the city of Tiberias. Modern-day Tiberias is a town of about 40,000 people. It is the largest town located on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Its beautiful modern hotels attest to the fact that its prosperity is heavily dependent upon tourism. The town was built by Herod Antipas between 18 and 20 AD, about 7 years before Jesus began his ministry. It was named Tiberias after the reigning Roman emperor of that time.
When selecting a site for his town, Herod was probably drawn to this area by these ancient hot springs. The water coming out of the ground here is about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Yow! Even to this day, people come to Tiberias from all over Israel to enjoy the hot mineral baths. While the town was being built, an ancient burial ground was discovered. For that reason, Jews concluded that it was unclean, and most refused to enter it.
Tiberias was therefore strictly a Roman town, and it's doubtful that Jesus ever entered it.
However, we know for sure that Jesus had supporters in the city because we're told in John 6:23 that the day after he fed the 5,000, a fleet of small boats full of people from Tiberias arrived on the eastern shore of the sea seeking to find Jesus.
Let's take a look for a moment at a map of the Galilee before we continue. The sea is shaped like an ancient handheld Jewish harp, and because of this shape, it was often referred to in the time of Jesus as the Sea of Kinneret, after the Hebrew word kinnor for harp.
The area known as the Galilee consists of more than just the sea. It includes all this area from the south end of the sea to the northern borders with Lebanon and Syria, and from the east coast of the sea to the Mediterranean here on the west. The area around the Sea of Galilee and to the west is called the Lower Galilee, and the area to the north is known as the Upper Galilee.
The two most important towns in the area with respect to the life of Jesus are Nazareth here, where Jesus grew up, and of course Capernaum here, which served as the headquarters of his ministry. We are standing here in Tiberias amid the ruins of an ancient Crusader fortress. Dennis, why don't you tell us what this area was like during the time of Jesus?
Okay, Dave. Well, Isaiah referred to this region as the Galilee of the Gentiles. That's because it was ruled by a succession of Gentile empires from the 8th century to the 2nd century BC. The region did not come back under Jewish rule until 80 BC.
By the time of Jesus, there was so much foreign influence that Galileans could be recognized by their distinctive accent. Like in the United States, a southern drawl or a southwestern twang. For example, after the arrest of Jesus, when Peter was confronted in the courtyard of the home of the high priest, he was told, "Surely you are one of them, for your accent gives you away."
Among the Roman administrators at the time of Jesus, the Galilee had a reputation as a hotbed of subversive activity. Among the Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem, it was regarded as a heathen province riddled with religious cults. For this reason, the attitude of the Jews toward the Galilee was best summed up by the expression, "Can anything good come out of Galilee?"
On one occasion, the Pharisees denounced Jesus by saying, "Search the scriptures and you will see that no prophet arises out of Galilee."
But they were wrong, for Isaiah had prophesied that the Messiah would come out of Galilee. In a beautifully worded passage in Isaiah 9, he wrote, "The people who walk in darkness will see a great light that will come out of the Galilee of the Gentiles, and that light will be God's presence."
The Jewish historian Josephus reports that at the time of Jesus, there were 9 towns on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, all with a population of 15,000 or more. Today, there is only one town of any size, and that is Tiberias, located here on the west coast where we are right now. On the north coast was Capernaum, the headquarters of Jesus' ministry. Today it lies in ruins. We're going to start heading north now up the shore to the tiny village of Magdala, and then we'll head on up to Gennesaret, a kibbutz or collective farm. It's located here. The village of Magdala, or Migdal, was founded around the 1st century BC. By the time of Jesus, it had become one of the centers of Jewish life in the Galilee, known primarily for its fishing industry. Well, here we are in the ancient village of Magdala, or Migdal. As you can see, today it's simply ruins. This term, Migdal, in Hebrew means tower, and it could very well be that what we see remaining behind us here are the remains of the ancient tower.
In Christian history, this village is best known as the hometown of Mary Magdalene. According to Luke 8, she was healed by Jesus of evil spirits and sickness. In fact, the passage states that Jesus cast 7 demons out of her.
The same passage in Luke 8 says that another woman named Joanna became a supporter of Jesus at the same time. Amazingly, it says she was the wife of Chusa, Herod's steward.
Now, since Tiberias was Herod's headquarters, it's very likely that Joanna lived there only 4 miles from this site. She probably knew Mary and became a believer when she witnessed Mary's healing.
The two of them, Mary and Joanna, were present at the cross, and later they went to the tomb together to anoint Jesus' body.
In Mark 16:9, we're told that after the Lord's resurrection, Mary was the first person to whom Jesus appeared. And in John 20, we're told that she ran to the disciples and proclaimed, "I have seen the Lord." Because of Mary's love for the Lord and her faithfulness to him, this village became famous and will always be remembered.
In 1986, the world was reminded of the village of Magdala when an amazing discovery was made right here along the shore of the town.
The sea had fallen to its all-time low in modern history. In January of that year, two fishermen brothers walking along here discovered the shell of a boat that was encased in the exposed mud.
The boat was in very fragile condition. To keep the wood from disintegrating when being exposed to the air, it was encased in polyurethane foam. It was then floated to a kibbutz located on the North Shore, where conservation procedures were carried out. Today, the kibbutz houses the boat in a very special museum. Let's make that our next stop. The Jesus boat is located at this collective farm named Kibbutz Gunn, which was founded in 1937. This kibbutz runs a first-class motel facility that caters to tourists. This special building was constructed by the kibbutz to house the Jesus boat. The boat is 26.5 feet long by 7.5 feet wide. Its construction, utilizing mortise and tenon joints, indicates that it was built by a master craftsman. It was probably used for fishing, but it also could have been used as a ferry boat, accommodating up to 15 people. Some scholars speculate that the boat may have been sunk during the fierce sea battles between Jewish rebels and Roman legions that took place on the Sea of Galilee in 67 AD. Okay, let's take another look at our map. We started here at Tiberias. Our first stop was at Magdala. We're now at Kibbutz Gunn, and we're ready now to start heading east along the north shore of the Sea of Galilee to visit some of the most important sites that relate to the ministry of Jesus. They are Tabgha, Capernaum, Bethsaida, and the Hill of the Beatitudes. Our first stop will be here at Tabgha.
Well, here we are at Tabgha. This area was a prosperous fishing village in the time of Jesus.
There are two churches located here. The first is called the Church of the Multiplication of the Loaves and Fish. It marks the traditional site where Jesus fed the multitude of 4,000.
Here's a famous mosaic that was found at this site. It was on the floor of a Byzantine church that was built here in the 6th century. As you can see, it depicts a basket of bread with a fish on each side.
It was in this area that Jesus called Peter, Andrew, James, and John to be his disciples. And you know, folks, every time I think of that call, I am reminded of a great hymn by the 19th century American poet John G. Whittier, in which he referred to the Sea of Galilee as the Syrian Sea. Here's how it goes. Dear Lord and Father of mankind, forgive our foolish ways. Reclothe us in our rightful mind. In purer lives thy service find. In deeper reverence praise. In simple trust like theirs who heard beside the Syrian Sea, the gracious calling of the Lord, let us, like them, without a word, rise up and follow thee. O Sabbath rest by Galilee, O calm of hills above, where Jesus knelt to share with thee the silence of eternity, interpreted by love. Listen again to the words of the key verse. In simple trust like theirs who heard beside the Syrian Sea, the gracious calling of the Lord, let us, like them, without a word, rise up and follow thee. Peter, Andrew, James, and John met the Lord here and gave their lives to him. 3.5 years later, they had another encounter with him here after his resurrection.
The second church on this site commemorates that meeting. It's called the Church of Peter's Primacy. As you can see, it was built of the black volcanic basalt rock that litters the hills of this region.
The story of the disciples' post-resurrection meeting with Jesus here is told in the Gospel of John. It seems the disciples were fishing one morning in this area when Jesus suddenly appeared here on the shore. He called out to them and asked if they had caught any fish. They said no, and then he told them to cast their nets on the other side of the boat.
And when they did, they caught so many fish, they couldn't haul them all in.
At that point, Peter suddenly realized the man on the shore was Jesus. And in his typically impulsive manner, Peter jumped in the water and started swimming to the shore. He could not contain his excitement over seeing his risen Lord.
When all the rest of the disciples reached the shore in the boat, They all sat down and enjoyed a fish fry with Jesus.
It was during that breakfast that Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" And each time Peter assured the Lord that he did. Isn't that remarkable? Think of it. After Jesus' arrest and before his crucifixion, Peter denied him 3 times. Now, after the resurrection, Jesus gives Peter the opportunity to offset his 3 denials with 3 expressions of his love. Folks, that's what I call grace. This statue commemorates Jesus' restoration of Peter. Here is a view of the north shore of the Sea of Galilee from above. Just 1 hour's walk from Tabgha along the seashore was the most important town in the ministry of Jesus, his home base of Capernaum. This was the hometown of the Apostle Peter's wife, and their home is where Jesus probably lived during his Galilean ministry of 3.5 years. The basalt structure is a modern Catholic monastery. It is built near the traditional site of Peter's house. The lovely red dome church building to the left was built by the Greek Orthodox in 1931. It serves as a monastery today.
Jesus performed many of his most memorable miracles in Capernaum. Later in our series, we'll visit this town up close and consider in detail its significance in the life and ministry of Jesus.
The hill we are standing on is the traditional site of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's called the Mount of the Beatitudes. At the top is a beautiful chapel called the Chapel of the Beatitudes. Let's go take a look at it. This lovely chapel, located at the top of the Mount of the Beatitudes, was built in 1937 and was constructed of the local black basalt rock that covers the hills of this area. The chapel is octagonal in shape. Each of the 8 walls commemorate one of the Beatitudes that Jesus spoke in his Sermon on the Mount.
Jesus began his famous sermon here with these words, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." What a contrast to the attitude of the world. The world says, blessed are the beautiful, the intelligent, the wealthy, and the powerful. Jesus, on the other hand, says, blessed are the humble, the meek, the gentle, the merciful, and the pure in heart. Let's go to the back side of the chapel for a panoramic view of the Galilee before we proceed back to the shores of the sea.
As we take one last look at the Galilee from the top of this mount, I want to share with you some additional words of Jesus from the magnificent sermon that he delivered here. Do not be anxious for your life as to what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor for the body as to what you shall wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow, neither do they reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they? And why are you anxious about clothing? Observe how the flowers of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. If God arrays the grass of the fields, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into a furnace, will he not do much more for you, O men of little faith? Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear for clothing? But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you.
Well, let's return now to the seashore and keep heading east from Capernaum. As we do so, we'll come to the area where the Jordan River enters the sea.
Well, believe it or not, I am wading in one of the most famous rivers in the world, the Jordan River. And as you can see, it's not much of a river. It's actually just a small stream. In fact, in Texas, we would call it a creek. Dennis, come on in, brother.
Dave, I'm going to let you have all the fun this time. Folks, this is where the river enters the Sea of Galilee on the north. The river originates 25 miles north of here at a place called Caesarea Philippi, where it simply bubbles up out of the ground. That site is at the base of Mount Hermon, Israel's highest mountain. The water comes from natural springs and from the melting snow on the mountain.
Just on the other side of the river, to the east, is the site of another town where Jesus focused his ministry, the town of Bethsaida. Let's take a look at it. This is a site which in 1987 was proclaimed by the Israeli government to be the ancient village of Bethsaida.
For 2,000 years, Christian pilgrims earnestly searched for this site. After the birth of archaeology as a science in the 19th century, 2 of the 3 cities of Jesus' Galilean ministry were quickly discovered, namely Capernaum and Chorazin. But the location of Bethsaida remained a mystery.
Even now, archaeologists are divided on the issue, but most agree this was the site. But others argue that a site nearer to the sea is the actual one. The Bible indicates that the town was located on the shore of the sea and near the Jordan River. As you can see, this site is almost 1.5 miles from the sea, and it is not adjacent to the river.
But geological experts say that during the 2,000 years since the time of Jesus, deposits from the Jordan raised the ground level, the course of the river changed, and the sea itself receded. Let's go take a look at the gates of the city. Well, here we are at the gates of the town. The name of this town, Bethsaida, means house of the fishermen. And much evidence has been found that it was, in fact, a fishing village, which means that in the time of Jesus, the sea must have come up to this area.
This is the hometown of Peter. He moved to Capernaum later in life, probably after he got married. It was also the hometown of Andrew and Philip.
Several significant events occurred here in the ministry of Jesus. It's here that he performed a unique miracle by restoring a blind man's sight in stages. And on the plain just below the town, Jesus fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves and 2 fish.
Well, it's time for us to start heading south along the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. We plan to make 3 stops. First, we will visit the site here called the Gadarenes. This is where Jesus cast demons out of 2 men. Then we will proceed to the southern end of the sea to one of the oldest kibbutzim in all of Israel, called Kibbutz Degania. From there, we will go to our last stop, Jordanit, the Christian Baptismal Center. Our next stop will be in the area called the Gadarenes or the Gerasenes, where the mountains come down to the sea. What you see here are the remains of an ancient Byzantine church in a place called Kursi, located at the foothills of the Gadarenes. This is the traditional site where Jesus miraculously healed 2 demon-possessed men. Above us are the Golan Heights, which were occupied by Syria until the Six-Day War in 1967. The Syrians used to shoot from those heights at anything that moved down here, and that included lobbing shells at boats on the Sea of Galilee.
According to Matthew 8, Jesus was confronted here by 2 demon-possessed men who were so wild and so strong that no one could subdue them. When one of the men saw Jesus, he ran to him, bowed down, and the demon within him cried out, "You are Jesus, the Son of the Most High God."
And when Jesus asked the man his name, he said it was Legion, because he was possessed by a great host of demons.
Jesus immediately ordered the demons to depart from the men. They obeyed, but when they departed, they entered a herd of swine that was grazing nearby. When they did so, the pigs went crazy. They rushed off a steep bank and fell into the sea, and 2,000 of them drowned. Here's some good news. The Bible says that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That means he's still interested in people who are possessed, and he's still willing to deliver them. What about you? You may not be possessed by a demon, but you may be possessed by lust, money, alcohol, drugs, or power. If so, I urge you to turn to Jesus, confess your obsession, and cry out to him for deliverance.
Thank you, Dennis, for that powerful word. We really appreciate that. And I think we're ready now, folks, to go to Kibbutz Degania.
Right.
Wait a minute. Before we go, there is one lighthearted observation that I would like to add. Are you ready for this?
I guess I'll have to be.
Okay. I once heard a preacher read this story that you were just talking about what happened here. And he told about how the demons entered the swine, they ran down and all. And then he looked up from the reading and he smiled very broadly and he said, "Now you know the origin of deviled ham."
Oh, Dave, that's terrible.
These are the grounds of Kibbutz Degania, located at the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee.
This is a very historic place because it was the very first kibbutz, our collective farming community, to be established in Israel. That was in 1910. This kibbutz became a model for many other collective communities that were established from one end of Israel to the other. These communities served as foundation of the nation.
It was through the labor of these communities that the land was reclaimed in fulfillment of the prophecy in the book of Ezekiel, where it says that in the end times, when the Jews return to their homeland, the desolate land will become like the Garden of Eden, and the wasted, desolate, and ruined cities will be fortified and inhabited.
Today, approximately 530 people live here, and they earn their living in a variety of ways, primarily through agriculture and the manufacture of high-tech cutting tools for diamonds. Incidentally, this kibbutz was the birthplace of one of Israel's most famous generals, Moshe Dayan. He was one of the architects of Israel's overwhelming victory in the Six-Day War of 1967.
Okay, let's complete our introductory tour of the Galilee by visiting the Christian baptismal site called Jordanite. It's located right around the corner from here. This is the beautiful site called Jordanite, where most Christian pilgrims come to witness their faith in baptism.
Some consider this place to be the traditional site of the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist, but that simply could not be true, because John preached in the wilderness of Judea and did his baptizing in that area near where the Jordan River enters the Dead Sea, and that's many miles south of here.
I praise God for this great facility because I can remember what it was like before this place was built. When I first started coming over here in the late 70s, we had to wade out in the river and sink ankle deep in the mud and try to baptize people without losing them in the river's current. There was no place to change clothes or to dry off afterwards. I'll tell you what, let's do, Dennis. Why don't we go down to one of the baptismal places and I'll baptize one of the members of the crew.
Sounds great.
Okay. This is Sam McCullough from Owasso, Oklahoma. Sam is one of the volunteer members of our video crew and also a trustee of Lamb and Lion Ministry. I'm going to baptize him now in the Jewish style as a witness of his faith. Many, many years ago, Isaiah the prophet said that the Messiah would be born of a virgin, and his name would be called Emmanuel, meaning God with us. He also said that the Messiah would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, and Prince of Peace. Sam, do you believe that Jesus of Nazareth fulfilled those prophecies of Isaiah?
I do.
I know you do. And brother, I'm going to baptize you now in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach as a witness of your faith.
Hallelujah.
Praise the Lord.
When Dave baptizes people here, he always likes to mention Jesus' fulfillment of prophecies in the Hebrew Scriptures. And he likes to baptize in the Jewish name of Jesus and in Jewish style, because there are usually Jewish people here who are observing. Well, folks, it's late in the afternoon, and the sun is about to set here on the Sea of Galilee.
And as the sun sets, I'd like to share with you a poem that was written by one of America's greatest poets, Carl Sandburg. The poem is entitled Epistle, and it reads like this. Jesus loved the sunsets on Galilee, and Jesus loved the fishing boats, forming silhouettes against the sunsets on Galilee. But most of all, Jesus loved the fishermen on the fishing boats, forming silhouettes against the sunsets of Galilee. And when Jesus said, goodbye, goodbye, I will come again, he meant that goodbye and that promise for the fishing boats, the fishermen, the silhouettes, all and any against the sunsets of Galilee. And that goodbye and that promise meant all or nothing at all.
Well, what does that promise mean to you? If you're a Christian, it should mean everything, and your response to it should be a commitment to holiness and evangelism. If you're not a Christian, then the promise means nothing, and that's sad, because, my friends, Jesus really is returning. He's going to fulfill the second coming prophecies, just like he fulfilled all the prophecies about his first coming.
And when he returns, he's going to be either your blessed hope or your holy terror. You will either greet him with rejoicing, or you will run from him in fear.
That's because our Heavenly Father, being a just God, must deal with sin. And he does so with either grace or wrath. All of us have sinned. And that means all of us are subject to the wrath of God unless we place our faith in Jesus as Lord and Savior. When you do that, you're delivered from wrath into the glorious grace of God, and you're sealed for redemption. I urge you to do that now. Confess to God that you're a sinner. Repent of your sins and cry out to God for salvation, placing your faith in Jesus. And from that moment on, you will live looking for the glorious day when Jesus will return to this earth as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Well, folks, that's our program for this week. We hope you will be back with us next week when we'll take a close-up look at Nazareth, the village in the Galilee where Jesus grew up and began his ministry. Until then, this is Dave Reagan speaking for Lamb and Lion Ministries saying, look up, be watchful, for our redemption is drawing near.
Okay, so that was good introduction to the Sea of Galilee. Are there any questions before we dismiss tonight? Doing good? Ready to go? Okay, we're dismissed. I'll see you next Friday. Yes, Lila Tov. Lila Tov.